Hello, my name is Johann Hari. I'm the author of the book Chasing the Scream. And I want to talk to you just very quickly about why First Step is doing such important work in Melbourne and why it's saving so many people's lives. So this was really important to me because one of my earliest memories is of trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to. And I didn't understand why then, because I was so young, but as I got older, I realized we had addiction in my family, several members of my family. And I think, like a lot of people, I was a real mixture of emotions because part of me felt very compassionate towards the people I loved. And part of me was really angry and thought, well, why are you choosing this? Why are you doing this? Why aren't you just stopping? Right? We're taught to think in this culture that addiction is a choice, that what you just partied too hard. And, I never entirely, that wasn't all of what I thought at any point in my life, but it was a big part of what I thought. It was a big part of the voices in my head. But when I actually, for my book, went on a big journey all over the world and learned about the science of addiction, I learned that the core of addiction is about not wanting to be present in your life because your life is too painful a place to be. The core of addiction is about trying to anesthetize your pain, about not being there. And that's actually true of addictions that don't include drugs. That's true of gambling or porn, and it's true of alcohol, cocaine, whatever your drug of choice might be. I really began to understand that when I learned about a very simple experiment that's transformed how we think about addiction all over the world. So when I started researching this 10 years ago now, if you'd asked me, let's say heroin addiction, because that was close to me, if you'd said, well, what causes heroin addiction? I would have looked at you like you were an idiot. And I would have said, well, mate, the clue's in the name. Obviously, heroin causes heroin addiction. We've been told this story for 100 years that's become totally part of our common sense. It was certainly part of mine. We think if I kidnap the next 20 people to walk past this building here in London and I injected them all with heroin every day for a month, like a villain in a Saw movie, at the end of that month, they'd all be heroin addicts for a simple reason. That there's chemical hooks in heroin that their bodies would start to desperately physically crave. And at the end of that month, they just have this tremendous physical hunger for the chemical hooks in the drug. That's why we call it being hooked, right? But it turns out while chemical hooks are real, they're actually a very small part of what's happening in addiction. And this was discovered in the 1970s by an incredible man I got to know named Professor Bruce Alexander, who I went to interview in Vancouver. And Professor Alexander explained to me this story we have in our heads that addiction is caused primarily or entirely by the chemical hooks in the drug comes from a series of experiments that were done earlier in the 20th century. They're really simple experiments. You can all try them at home if you're feeling a bit sadistic. You take a rat, you put it in a cage, and you give it two water bottles. One is just water, the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat tries both. It will always prefer the drugged water and almost always kill itself by overdosing within a couple of weeks. So there you go. That's our choice. The animal tries both. It chooses to keep trying the one that's got the drugs in it, and then it dies. But in the 70s, Bruce came along, Professor Alexander came along and said, well, hang on a minute. You put the rat alone in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. It has nothing that meets its needs. What would happen if we did this differently? So he built a cage called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats, right? They've got loads of friends, they've got loads of cheese, they've got loads of colored balls, they can have loads of sex. Anything a rat would want in life is there in Rat Park. And they've got both the water bottles, the normal water and the drug water. And they try both. This is the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, they don't like the drug water. They hardly ever use it. None of them use it compulsively. None of them overdose. So you go from almost 100% compulsive use and overdose when they don't have their needs met, when they don't have the things that make life worth living, to no compulsive use and overdose when they do have the things that make life worth living. Now, this is playing out in human addiction all over the world. It's why I explain the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, valuable though that is to some people. The opposite of addiction is connection. And if you think about the amazing work that First Step do, many things can cause people to become disconnected from their needs. One of them, which is hugely plays out, is trauma. If you experience horrific trauma in your childhood, you'll find it much harder to trust the world. You'll find it much harder to bond and connect with people until you've had a chance to deal with that underlying trauma. That's going to make you more like the rats in the isolated cage and less like the rats in Rat Park. What we've got to see is that the addictive behavior is an attempt to solve a problem. The problem is the underlying pain. You know, Marianne Faithfull, the great British rock star, it slightly annoys me that everyone remembers her as Mick Jagger's girlfriend, because she's much better than Mick Jagger. No disrespect to Mick, who I've met and is quite a nice person, but Marianne is a much better person. And Marianne had a heroin addiction in the 60s when she was homeless. She has this line that really haunted me and I found very challenging when I first heard it, when I first read it. She said, "Heroin saved my life, because if it wasn't for heroin at that point, I would have killed myself." Right? Now, Marianne is not saying that heroin is a good solution to human distress for all the reasons that are completely obvious. She's saying in that situation, it was the best solution anyone offered her. Now, what we've got to work at doing is understanding why people would be in so much pain. If you want to understand why people are using painkillers, you've got to understand why they're in so much pain. That's the core of what we need to understand. And then we need to help them have better solutions. And some people will never be able to leave behind those anesthetics because their pain is so deep and their trauma is so deep. And the only way we will be able to help people move beyond it, if they can, is by offering much better solutions. But once you understand all that, you can see that what we do in Australia, in Britain, in so many countries is such a disaster. Our approach is to say, well, you chose this, it's on you. We need to punish you to give you an incentive to stop. We need to inflict pain on you to make you stop. But once you understand that pain is the driver, pain is the fuel, you can see that's a crazy strategy. It actually makes the problem worse. What we've got to do is give love, support, compassion, exactly what First Step is doing. And when we talk about choice, when it comes to addiction, it's not a choice to become addicted, but there is a choice here, and the choice is on us. There are people among us who are profoundly traumatized, who need love, compassion, and support. We've got to choose. Are we going to choose to treat them like shit, make their lives worse, and make them more likely to continue in addiction and die? Or are we going to choose, like First Step, to give them love, compassion, and practical support? That's what they need. That's what will help them. That's the choice we can make. The choice isn't on them. The choice is on us. So if you want to make the right choice, I urge you to support First Step and become part of the fight for harm reduction and for love and compassion for everyone who has an addiction problem. This is what they need. This is what we all need, love and compassion. Thanks very much.